feared and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hit you with a win. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Disciples of Ed here on the Always Next to Your Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rob, joined tonight by Joe Borek. How you doing, Borek?
I'm doing solid. I mean, not as much so because of the Flyers' recent play, more so because springtime's in the air. And you know me, I just enjoy watching as much hockey as possible. So I've been enjoying other games. Flyers, not so much, but we'll get into that pretty soon.
The man is a hockey fiend. On top of enjoying the Flyers, or not enjoying the Flyers, also enjoying a ton of Phantoms action as well as you're covering that team. You said before we started recording that you'll be up there for the game tomorrow night. So at least you've got some kind of good hockey, or not as depressing hockey to watch aside from the Flyers. It's been a rough go over the past few weeks or so. The losses have been blowouts. They've had a few close wins. They had a pretty frustrating game last night in which they outplayed the New York Islanders but lost by a final score of 2-1. Sorokin for the Islanders stood on his head for 60 minutes, and then the Flyers, as you alluded to before we began recording, forgot how to play hockey in overtime. So, yeah, it's been a frustrating go. The Flyers now on the outside looking in terms of the playoff race, and it's kind of, time's closing in on them a little bit. They're more than halfway through the season. They've got, I believe, 26 games left. They've got to get some wins. And luckily for them, the schedule throughout the rest of this month, at least, is a little bit on the easier side. They're playing some teams below them in the standings. New Jersey, Buffalo, a few games there. It's an opportunity for the Flyers to kind of right the ship here and gain ground in the standings. And what's your takeaway from this upcoming schedule? And what do you think the Flyers need to do in terms of changing their game, improving their play so that they can get into the playoff race?
Well, they pretty much have to play, like I put in my preview on my Sports Fanatic News YouTube for today's game, like they did in the damn 60 minutes. As long as you take out that overtime that you felt like you were trying to play 3-on-3 hockey while you were at 4-on-4 the entire time, that was just horrendous. Also, probably the Rangers and definitely the Sabres, like you did in the 60 minutes against the Islanders, unless if Shesterkin, Blackwood, or whoever the hell was in net for Buffalo just goes off like Sorokin did, you should win those games. Because realistically, they should have won yesterday if Sorokin wasn't an absolute menace, like you said, to the Flyers yesterday and really was the first star of that game. I think this is beneficial for the Flyers. If they can play like they did yesterday, obviously you don't have the same team as last year, but that strategy of using the forechecking more, not rushing into the zone, having all the forwards rush into the zone so they never get back on defense, which has been an issue this year. If you can play like you did yesterday, which reminded me in the 60 minutes of how we played last year before COVID hit when we were really doing good, then you would be in a much better spot playing these teams lower in the standings until we trade for an obvious needed defenseman. I mean, no matter if you keep playing like you did yesterday for 60, that doesn't mean anything. You still need to trade for another defenseman. That's obvious. But if you can play those teams like that, we should be in a much better sitting, I think, by the 31st than we are on the 23rd right now, as long as you can keep playing the game you played yesterday, excluding the OT. That 60 minutes might have been the best 60 minutes. Not might have, was definitely the best 60 minutes we played this season. You just couldn't capitalize and find a second goal.
So the Flyers coming up. We mentioned it gets a little bit easier. They're against the Devils tonight. They've got 2 against the Rangers, who, yes, below them in the standings, but don't forget they lost to them 9-0 last week. So Yeah,
Yeah,
below the
that's why I
standings,
said you have
but
to play like that. Yeah, you can't
yeah,
play like you did last week. You're losing 9-0 again. But if you play like you did against the Isles, that's the type of play I think. I don't know, Rob. I'll pitch this question to you. But isn't how we played in that 60 more tenacious on the forecheck similar to last year's play? Kind of just all we've been calling for this year. Where if you can get that consistently, eventually results will start going in your way.
yes. And they need to not be bothered by the result of last night. Yes, it wasn't what they wanted. Unfortunately, they're only able to pot one puck early in the game off the stick of Oscar Lindblom. They need to keep that going. They need to keep doing that, and eventually it's going to tilt back in their favor. They'll be able to put more pucks in the net. Hopefully the goaltending can kind of fix their ways and become a little bit more efficient as well. Elliott, he played decently, but that was a bad goal that he let up in overtime. They need him to start playing better. They need Carter Hart to start playing much better.
It was also a bad turnover.
It was, yes, it was.
Yeah, that was a bad.
And that's story of the year for the Flyers.
Yeah.
So they got those two games against the Rangers, and then they have two up in Buffalo where they recorded back-to-back shutouts earlier in the season. Of course, the last time they played against the Sabres, they needed to kind of claw their way back to a 5-4 shootout win. So not so impressive there, but just things are kind of easing up, at least temporarily, in terms of the schedule, and they need to get it together. I mean, yes, they did play better last night. That much is certain, but that's still not going to be enough when it comes down to getting enough points, getting the wins that they need to get into the playoffs. They need to not just play better, they need to win. And whatever they need to do, yes, they need to acquire some help defensively. Ekholm will be a beautiful thing. We talked on the last show about some prospects, or not prospects, but some trade prospects that they could bring in to shore up the defense. Chuck Fletcher needs to get something done there. That much is obvious. But with the schedule kind of lighting up a little bit in these next coming games, they need to go out there and win. They need to go out there, and over the course of these next 5 games, I would say they need at least 4 wins to right the ship. It's been frustrating, but the way that they played last night, it does lend some hope that they can kind of right the ship, and they need to go out there and win these next 5 games.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I mean, Rob, I think the beginning of the month, if you play these teams like you did the last time you played them, yeah, you're not guaranteed, well, you're going to get spanked by the Rangers again if you do what you did the last time. But if you play Buffalo like you did the last time, you're not guaranteed to beat them in OT. So I think you got to play like you did last night, keep building on that, and you're fine. And obviously acquire somebody. My good buddy brought up something about Ekholm, though, that I wasn't even thinking of until he brought it up, just because I love his contract and didn't have the expansion draft on me. Trading for Jomerson, I think, has become my top guy now, just because he won't screw us with expansion. If you trade for Ekholm, you have to leave someone else unprotected because you brought in a guy with next year that you're most likely going to want to protect, because if you lose him, that's terrible. So.
Yes.
I think that kind of skews their thinking, unless if they can kind of flip somebody that they would have protected to get Ekholm, and then it kind of balances itself out. But Jomerson became my top guy just for not messing with the expansion. Plus, he has 3 freaking cups, so he brings the winning experience like Niskanen did, and brings that like defensive mentality of, he's even more of a defensive defenseman, honestly, than probably Niski, where Niski earlier in his career was both sides, and then as he aged, developed into the better, consistent defender. But Jomerson, I think, is my guy. He brings the winning pedigree, and I don't have to worry about losing out some young guy because we can't protect him in expansion since we got Ekholm. That's literally the only reason why Jomerson, my top guy. On top of that, he's one of the better defensemen on the market, but I would want Ekholm above him if it didn't screw with expansion. But I would like Jomerson because I think we could re-sign him too if you bring him in for probably more like 4.5, 4 million rather than 5, whatever the heck he gets now. So I feel like that could be a good guy.
So not considering you make that comment concerning expansion, which is a very valid consideration, obviously, with the new team in Seattle, and the Flyers would kind of be in a little bit of a pickle if they did bring in Ekholm, as you mentioned, with the expansion draft. But not considering the expansion, just purely based on team fit, who would you rather have between those two?
Off a team fit, I think both of those guys are pretty similar. I mean, Ekholm's going to give you more at this point of his career, being younger and still more in his actual peak prime years than Jomerson. He'll give you more on the offensive side still while providing defense. But Jomerson will pitch in. I mean, he's on Arizona. They don't run a scheme that allows their defenders to pitch into the offense as much as Philly does. So I think, other than if you're OEL, but I think, or Chitrin. But I think that they're be able to bring him in. I think he'll work well. I would say leaning a bit Ekholm, but it's not as much as others probably are, just because I think Jomerson, even more than Ekholm, brings in those cup winning experience that, listen, this is what you got to do to get to the promised land. Follow me and I'll help you get there, kind of like Niski did. Goligoski has one cup. He would kind of do the same thing, but not to the same degree. One thing Ekholm doesn't have that Jomerson does is 3 cups, because Nashville hasn't won one damn cup in their entire existence. So I think it's close. I would lean Ekholm, excuse me, if it wasn't for expansion, but Jomerson's literally, it's like a 5% lean for me, because I've liked both of these guys their entire careers, and you have a good chance of re-signing Jomerson for a good value 2-year deal, I think, if you bring him in. And I think you're stupid if you bring him in and don't keep him past this year. But the reason being is I think Fletcher will be smart enough to lock him up once you bring him in. So I'll put him, just due to logistics, above Ekholm. But if it wasn't due to logistics, like you said, it would be Ekholm by like a 5% margin, because I really do think Jomerson fits this team perfectly as well.
Yeah, I like them both. I'm a big Ekholm guy, though, and just because of his durability alone, it's been the past 6 years that he's averaged over 20 minutes of ice time a game, including the last 5 years, he's averaged over 22 minutes per game. The offense is he's putting together a little bit more offense this year in the shortened season. He's already got 5 goals through 25 games, whereas his career high is 10 goals in 81 games back in the 17-18 season, in which Nashville went to the Stanley Cup. So offensively, a little bit of an uptick for him, although you wouldn't really expect that to be his forte. He is more of a defensive guy, which, as we've alluded to before, the Flyers do need. And I love the fact that he's a guy who can go out there and eat up ice time. As I mentioned, 20-plus minutes a game, 22-plus minutes a game. Takes a lot of pressure off some of the other guys. It takes pressure off of Provorov. Takes pressure off of Sanheim, takes pressure off of Phil Myers, and he can be that veteran presence that Matt Niskanen kind of was last season, and really, really a stabilizing force. And Jomerson can do the same, by the way, at least in terms of the veteran presence. So either one of them would be a huge upgrade. So Chuck Fletcher, come on, man, make some moves, make a move, shore up that defense. It's the biggest hole that the Flyers have, and it's something that, If it's not fixed, they're not going to make the playoffs. That's as simple as that.
I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like they should make the move, even though we have the easier schedule we talked about, still sooner rather than later, because I hate when GMs go, oh, well, we can wait a little bit because of whatever. Like, whenever you go, we can wait a little bit because of, usually you're wrong. So
the longer you wait, the more you end up paying, too.
Yeah, exactly. So you might as well go out there now, see who's on the market, see who you can get, and try to bring in somebody that would help. Personally, I think this team would benefit the most, especially now when you have Hag. You don't even have as much depth because he's out for 3 weeks. Prosser's like your depth guy. You might benefit more from getting 2 guys rather than just one defenseman, where you get one guy that's more of like a Jomerson level guy, and then another guy that's maybe like a Matthew Benning level guy that's just a nice steady Eddie guy, so you have more defense depth due to injuries and potential injuries of some guys that obviously have been banged up at times this year, or Myers, you can protect him a little bit more if you get other guys rather than just one guy. That's the reason why I believe I like Jomerson, because I feel like you wouldn't pair him with Provy. I think you would pair him with Myers, and Myers played his best game last night. If you can get a guy that sets him right, that would help the Flyers miraculously for the future, too. So Provy hasn't been as impressive this year, but he's still fine. He can play with whoever you put him with. I feel like if you traded for a Benning or Demers, you might let them try to play with Provy because they're right-handed and actually move. Both of them are not fleet of foot. Benning is a little bit of a quick skater. Demers is a fleet of foot, but they're right-handed like Braun was, and you can kind of do that. But I feel like the Flyers would be smart to actually get more of a fifth, sixth defenseman, fifth, sixth, seventh guy that you can kind of platoon in and out, and a Jomerson level guy to just kind of add to the depth. Because last year we were talking about how we had depth on defense. This year that's not so much the case, especially since you lost Friedman to Pittsburgh too. So
Yes. Yeah, without a doubt. And it's just, as I said, it's a glaring need. The Flyers need to go out there and fix that. And clearly there are many issues with this team, and they really came to a head in that 9-0 loss to the Rangers last week, and then again in the 6-1 loss to the Islanders. Some really ugly games. What was your takeaway from those games? Anything that really stuck out to you as, okay, this is a huge problem? Any issues maybe with the coaching staff or the line pairings or defense? Obviously, Carter Hart did not perform well when he came in. Neither did Brian Elliott in those two games. So is there anything from those two blowout losses that really stuck out to you?
yeah, I would say those were hard games to watch. I mean, I know those games, there was no chance I could have done my reaction videos right after the game because I would have said stuff that I wouldn't have got away with saying because I was heated after both of those games. So that happened the next day. But they were rushing, like this team, they played a game that they were trying to, for some reason early on, play stupidly, like with when it comes to aggression. Like the Flyers would try to rush the zone, then nobody would be back on defense and pass it right into a guy's skate. So then the Rangers and or Islanders would or shoot it into a guy's skate. So the Rangers and or Islanders would then just be rushing back the other way. It's like they were going, oh, this ain't working. Let's just keep doing it. It's like the biggest like sin if you're like somebody that's ever studied psych. That was my minor, to keep doing something when it just hasn't worked 8 times. Like, it's not like it's just going to randomly, the 15th time you do the same thing, miraculously work. Like, they just kept trying to make passes in each of those games that were just never going to connect, especially outlets from the defense that were just those dumb stretch passes. I know Jim Jackson hates those. He talks about them every night. I hate them too. You only make those when they're right, when they're actually there and not just for the hell of it like the Flyers do. They played terrible. I mean, their defense left guys wide open in the gap, no matter what game it was. I mean, you have Panarin, Lemieux of the world, the Bunevich, they were just running roughshod in the Rangers game. Zibanejad, who had the natural hat trick. It was awful. I mean, you had nothing good to come from those games. Their defense left guys wide open. Their offense pushed the zone in a very stupidly, I don't even want to use the word aggressive because aggressive is usually used in the positive, but like a stupid like push the zone matter where you would either shoot it or pass it into someone's stick or skate 90% of the time. It was just the most annoying thing to watch. And then as the games went on against the Islanders and Rangers, eventually you could barely even get into your zone. So it was just it was just one of the 2 worst games I think I've honestly watched in maybe honestly the last couple years. Like, those games were just awful that I didn't even finish watching them. Like,
the Rangers game was the worst game that I've ever seen in my life. So I'll put that
I
out
think
there.
it might be. Yeah, I think it might be, honestly. Like, that's like a game that, like, you don't envision the Flyers having that bad of a goose egg. That's always been what the Phillies bring heartache to us for, having the absolute horrendous shitstorm of game. That's not always the Flyers. That's been the Flyers in 2 games. I mean, it was awful. There's nothing good to pull out of those 2 games. That's why I'm just saying, please perform like you did against the Islanders last night, and let's build from there, because those 2 games were a shitstorm. There was nothing to take from them, nothing offensively, nothing defensively. The only thing was Farabee kept performing in those games. Other than that, there's nothing you take from them.
I'll say this. I haven't seen a Philadelphia team or a team that I root for lose that badly since the Phillies lost to the Mets. What was it, 24-5 a couple years ago?
Oh, God, yeah, that's another game. I think it was probably like the 3rd inning, and I shut it off and went to play basketball or something.
Yep. it was embarrassing. And to give up 7 goals in the second period, it was just it was so rough to watch. And I think I stuck around until it was 7-0, and then I flipped it off. Actually, we were in the middle of recording an episode of CTP, and I had it on in the background, and I actually got up while we were in the middle of recording, and I went over and I turned the television off just because I couldn't bear to watch it, even though I wasn't really paying attention to it. That's how bad it was. But my concern with these, at least with that game, is Carter Hart looked fucking terrible. Like he's looked pretty bad for the latter part of the first half of the season here. He looked as bad as I have ever seen him. He looked like he had no interest in being out there on the ice. He was getting beaten left, right, and center. Couldn't stop anything. Couldn't stop a fucking beach ball if it was shot at him. And yes, the defense was not good. They had a ton of breakdowns. They looked like they were completely disinterested in the game as well. And yet Brian Elliott was bad before Hart, but Hart came in. It was not an inspiring effort from him. And it's starting to get kind of concerning with him, the way that
with
he's
Hart,
played.
real quick for you, Rob, because you're on the topic of him, I had a good question that popped in my head for you. Do you think it becomes mental at a certain point? When I was on a show with my friend earlier that he does live on his YouTube, someone brought that up, where in the COVID
it's already mental
age,
it's been mental
already
the whole time.
Yeah, where you're already kind of going through more mental stretch in the day and age you're playing the sport in right now through a pandemic, and then your team's defense has just hung you out to dry. You haven't been good yourself this year in terms of what you want to perform, but your defense has not made it any better. So I feel like it probably it is mental, but I don't know what your take is on that.
It's 100% mental. And I say that because we know what his skill level is. He's an excellent goalie in terms of the skills. We saw it last season. Cup of coffee in the 18-19 season. We know what he is from a skill perspective. He is an excellent elite level goaltender. Mentally, he's not there this year. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the fact that he's playing in Philadelphia, and it finally dawned on him that he's got the most rabid fan base in probably the entire NHL, or at least up there, the most rabid fan base with these sky high expectations for him. And maybe it's just a little bit overwhelming for, a young kid like him to kind of handle those expectations from a city like Philadelphia, and he's overwhelmed by it. And that's one theory right there. Another theory is, it was the snowball effect. He had one bad game, and we saw it last year where he would have bad games and he would bounce back and he would be excellent the next day. Hasn't been the case this year. He'll have one bad game, it snowballs into the next one, and it snowballs into the one after that, and it's continually gotten worse because he actually played pretty well in the beginning part of the season. He had some nice games out there. He wasn't out there getting shutouts, but he was consistently posting a .900 save percentage night in and night out for the first 10 games or so. And then I think it really started when they had that first trip up to Boston, and he had a really rough game in the first game of that series, and then he ended up getting pulled. I believe it was in the second game, where they lost, I think it was like 6-1 or something like that. And it's kind of been downhill since then. So yes, I think it's 100% mental.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on Carter. I think it definitely has to be mental at this point, where having Moose for him when he's always touted how much he's helped him along, it was a good decision by Fletcher. That was one of his good offseason decisions to keep him around, especially with how he's kind of saved our bacon a couple times this year when Hart hasn't performed well. And he let in that overtime goal he's going to want back. But other than that, I thought he was still positioned well and actually played well last night. I know on the intermission reports they were talking about his positioning and how he looked kind of in sync last night. And then my final point when it comes to Hart is I think it was smart by the coaching staff to give him a full mental day.
That was Elliott in that last night. Sorry.
Last night was Elliott, but
yes,
I think it was smart. I think it was smart to give Hart just a full mental day rest last night, where he wasn't even the backup. He was just watching the game from, I guess, the press box or wherever the heck he was watching it from. And then you had Lyon as the backup. So I think that was a smart decision to just give him a whole day just to watch video, just to watch the game from a different perspective. And I hope that that is able to make him clear his head and kind of come in to a kind of new energy into this game against the Devils tonight, as we're recording this. And hopefully we'll have a victory in the game against the Devils due to a good game by Carter Hart after that mental day for a head rest yesterday, having the night off. And we'll be next week talking about a couple good victories this week due to Carter Hart and Brian Elliott.
And you know what? The last time Hart faced the Devils, 33 saves on 34 shots. It was a 3-1 Flyers win. He's played well in his career against the Devils. He had his first career shutout against them. So, maybe wow, that's exactly what he needs. A game against a team that he's had success against throughout the course of his career. It could be the get-right game for him tonight. Hopefully it is, because they really, really need him to get back to being that franchise goaltender that they've envisioned all along. It's been a frustrating season from that regard, but I think it would do so much, not just for the Flyers and for Carter Hart's, mental well-being, but also for the fan base to see that, this guy still is that franchise goaltender. And if he can kind of at least inspire some hope throughout the rest of the season, that would be a big thing.
Yeah, that is certainly for sure. It's going to be interesting to follow in the offseason of both leagues, of the SHL and KHL, to see if either Urson or Fedotov eventually ever come over to make their ranks in the AHL and try to petition for a backup job in the future, or if both of them just decide to never really come over for the Flyers due to they already have Carter Hart. But if Hart keeps playing like this, I could see them having more of an incentive to say, I'll come over and try to compete a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Flyers do kind of have a little bit of a logjam in terms of the goaltending situation in their system. Guys like Sandstrom, kind of on their way up as well. So, I mean, it's not the worst situation ever with their goaltending.
If he wasn't injured. Yeah, and Usti if he wasn't injured. Yes. The only reason he's not one of the primary Phantoms guys is injury. So.
Yeah, so the Flyers, they're not in the worst situation ever with the goaltending. Yes, the two guys they have, Hart hasn't been playing well pretty much the whole season. Elliott has been struggling of late, so it hasn't been an ideal situation. But in the grand scheme of things, not the worst situation ever with the goaltending. I think they should be all right. I think Carter Hart will get back to being that guy that we all envisioned as the Lord and Savior between the pipes. Maybe not this season. Maybe he kind of needed to get some struggles out of his way and work through some kinks this year, and hopefully he'll be back and ready to go before, sooner rather than later. So, yeah.
I mean, I think the Flyers, though, I must say, when it comes to one thing with goaltending, Sandstrom has played now more after being up on the taxi squad. Early, they were mismanaging him, not getting him enough games. Then they sent him down to actually play in the AHL. McIntyre's played a lot. I think they've been mismanaging the crap out of Alex Lyon, since he's your third-string goaltender and has played one period in 365 days. So I feel like teams that I've watched around the league have found games to get their third stringers into, whether it comes to the NHL level or they smartly, more than just for a period, set them down to the AHL level to actually get some action. I believe in him he's the Phantoms' all-time winningest goaltender for people that don't know. I believe in him as a third-string goaltender. I just think it's hard when you've only played one period in 365 days of live action, so I feel like that's very unfair to him, and I think they should get him more action, probably at the AHL level, but you're playing the Buffalo Sabres next week. You could throw him in. He's stepped up in times in the past. Hell, he beat Colorado for us last year, and Boston in the past is one of his other wins. Yeah, oh, nice, yeah. Boston at one of his other wins as well, I think. So I think you got to actually treat this dude right and get him in some action so he's prepared, God forbid, but just in case something happens.
Yeah, hey, being the all-time wins leader for the Phantoms is no small feat when you consider They had Neil Little between the pipes throughout the latter part of the 90s and early 2000s. He was there for a while. Antero Nidmaki was also there for a while. They've had some talent between the pipes and the Phantom system, and to be the all-time wins leader for him is pretty impressive. So, yeah, he's not going to be a star, really even a starting caliber goaltender at the NHL level, but certainly a guy who you can get some spot starts in every once in a while just to kind of give the other guys a break. And, yeah, I do agree with these upcoming games against Buffalo, a team that's really struggling and a team that's going to be without Jack Eichel. You know, it's a good spot, and I too would like to see them get Alex Lyon a little bit of playing time there as well. So get the job done, Flyers. Come on.
Yeah, you just got to be fair to your players, and some guys they haven't been very fair to this year. Like Myers hasn't played great this year, but I think they've been very hypocritical benching Myers as much as they've had, and just keep continuously running with Sanheim. Because Sanheim's been very inconsistent this year and has been one of our worst graded defensemen. So how do you give Myers the reasoning if he comes to you to ask why you keep benching him over his line mate? Because it's not like he's playing much better. And Myers played his best game last night. Sanheim finally played a better game. I think if he's a guy, if he keeps performing like he is, needs to get one of those 1 or 2 day game breaks, even though he's supposed to be one of your top 4, just because he isn't performing like a top 4. So putting in another guy for him isn't going to kill you how he's playing right now like it usually would. I think if you're resting guys like Myers, you rest a Ghost a lot. For guys like Prosser, when I don't think that should have been the case, you should rest a guy like Sanheim who hasn't been performing to top-notch level for sure for the whole season. So,
yeah, I'll say this. Remember that first game of that 2-game set with the Rangers where early on in the game, Sanheim almost put the puck in his own net, and then later on, he possessed the puck in the neutral zone for whatever reason, skated back into his own zone, and then tripped and did a face plant into the boards. That's pretty much been a microcosm of his whole season. Like inconsistent, I think, is a little bit of kind words there. I think that he's just been bad throughout the course of the season. And he's been a large part of why this Flyers defensive core as a whole has really kind of underperformed. Travis Sanheim not playing to the level that he's capable of. I don't want to say he was excellent last season, but he was very good. And I think we had high expectations for him coming into this season. And maybe it's a mental thing with him as well. Just like I said, it might be with Carter Hart.
probably.
But yeah, he hasn't been good. And I do agree with you. I would like to see them, give him a few games off, give him some time to kind of get his head right, and give Phil Myers some more ice time, because I think that as Myers hasn't played great this season either, but I think that maybe if you give him more ice time, that's kind of a little bit of a nod to him. Maybe it gives him a little bit of confidence going forward, and you might see that reflect in his gameplay as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing because Myers responded in a couple games when he first came back to the bench and then bottomed out a little bit again and then had his best game of the year last night. So it's worked for some guys. It didn't work as well for guys like TK, but it's worked for guys like Knack and guys like Myers. So I think it's a smart thing and Raffle at times this year as well. So I think it's a smart thing to do. Just give him some rest and be able to kind of let him come back stronger as time goes on. And again, trading for that defenseman, I think will do, like you said, I think it's mental for a lot of these guys with how the season's been going this year. Trading for a defenseman will help kind of settle down the troops too, bringing in a veteran like a Jomerson that kind of makes them settle down the troops, just like Muzzin does up there in Toronto for a defense that used to be pretty damn frantic itself. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're actually a little bit up against it now. The Flyers have dropped the puck against the New Jersey Devils, and so we've got some Flyers hockey to watch here, so we can talk about it next time we record an episode. But, Borek, do you have any final thoughts that you want to throw in before we end this one here?
yeah, my final thoughts are pretty much what we echoed in this podcast. Sooner rather than later, Chuck, please trade for a defenseman and maybe also a physical forward. You had one on your team last year that's kicking everyone's ass right now in San Jose, other than Derek Forbert, or not there, Curtis McDermott, who won his fight last night, and Gabriel, who would be nice just to have play like 10-game stretch for us just to show guys how to stick up for people, because that's been an issue with our team this year. People get rocked on our team, and nobody approaches the guy.
Aside from the one instance where Nolan Patrick did it a few games ago. That's about it.
Yeah, aside from that, in a couple games when Andy Andreoff played, but his ceiling for staying in the NHL is not high. So you should have kept a guy that could have done it, or maybe play Trewinski, who kind of does that game type a little bit more, if he can kind of play like he did in the victory, which game he was at. Oh, the victory against the Rangers, I believe, was the game that he played in, as well as I think maybe the Islanders victory, but I know it was the Rangers one. I think he played over 13 minutes. So if he can play in that role well, that would help, because the Flyers are lacking a guy that just steps up physically to respond to a big physical play of someone else. You need to step up for your teammates. That's a big closing point for me, because that's been something that has not been the case whatsoever, except for a select few games. Lindblom did it in the blowout loss the other day. This year, you got to do that. You got to take advantage of the schedule in the roundabout of the month, because that's going to determine whether we're going to probably sell a little bit or actually look to buy and add a defenseman if Fletcher doesn't do it before the end of the month. But I think he should do it before the end of the month. You must play better in front of your goaltender. And like I said, this team has the time to take advantage of the schedule. Now you just got to go and do it.
100%. The Flyers, as a team, they've got to start sticking up for each other. Chuck Fletcher has got to trade for defensemen. The Flyers have got to start winning hockey games. And you have got to start going to Just Food, located in Buckingham, Pennsylvania. You can reach them by phone at 215-794-3663. That's Just Food. Once again, located in Buckingham Green in Buckingham, Pennsylvania. Excellent selection of food there. I love going there whenever I'm hungry. Their owner, Asian Rob, a great friend of the Always Next Year podcast network. I will never, ever leave that place displeased with my selection of food there. Neither will you. Once again, Just Food. 215-794-3663. That's 215-794-FOOD. Located in Buckingham Green in Buckingham, Pennsylvania. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Disciples of Ed. We'll be back with another one next week.
Used to be revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too. He beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, my lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.